Welcome to another episode of A Pint with Seaniebee. This is a good one today. I have a raconteur, a gentleman who is a great friend of mine, and I'm in Charleston in South Carolina. And this gentleman is a man who I've known for, I think, maybe 7-8 years now.
Oh, yes. It's been 7 or 8 years.
7 or 8 years. He is a first-generation Italian New Yorker who has a big life to talk to us about today. And his name is Anthony Pavoni, but we all call him Tony Pavoni. Is that okay?
That's fine, Sean.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Tony has lived in a lot of places around America. And as I said, he was a first-generation Italian-American, meaning he was born in New York, but his parents came from Italy. Is that correct?
Well, actually, my father came from Italy. He was the immigrant. My mother was born here. She was a first-generation American. Her father was an immigrant. My father was an immigrant. Okay.
Where were they from in Italy?
Well, actually, they were both from a similar area. Province is called Marche. It's on the eastern side of Italy, near Bologna, mountainous country. I've actually visited that area to see where my father was born. It's a beautiful, beautiful country.
The common thing that we have is the Irish and the Italians built New York. Do you believe that?
Well, my father, when he first came here in 1920, worked on the road gangs, helping to build a highway system. And they were using tools today that were available at that point, which were shovels, bulldozers, which were very kind of old and archaic.
Was he working in Manhattan or
no?
Out
actually, they worked in West Virginia, Pennsylvania,
he traveled,
and New York. All the roads that part of the network right now, like US 81 was one of the roads they worked on, but it wasn't called US 81 at the time.
It was called One.
Well, it was just two-lane highways.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been many roads.
No, there were just two-lane highways.
What were your early years like, and where? Tell me a bit about where you were born and how you came to be.
Eventually, my family, my father and my mother, married in the 30s during the Depression. I was the last child that they had. I have two sisters who are older, but I was born in 1941 in Rochester, New York, but lived in a small suburb called East Rochester. Small town, Italian immigrants settled in there. Spaghetti on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Spaghetti on
red
Sunday.
Wine.
Homemade red wine. There wasn't any liquor stores around to provide you wine.
So where'd they get the grapes from?
Oh, they'd buy them. They'd buy them by the crates, the grapes. And every one of my uncles had his own little wine press in the basement.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I suppose the Irish were there making poutine and shit like that for themselves.
Moonshine, probably.
Moonshine, yeah.
It was a homemade Italian red. Very sports-minded town. Football, basketball, baseball, golf. It was a huge thing about the town because most of the kids, to make money, ended up being caddies. The private golf courses around Rochester. So, hey, as you grew up, you had to find a source of money, and your family was pushing you towards finding money because chip in.
Yeah.
Anthony.
Did you become a caddy?
Oh, absolutely. It was a fun time because you could play sports, you could do things into the night.
Yeah.
You never had to lock your door.
Yeah.
You were safe. And then on top of that, like I said to you, it was a close-knit town. And in the town, if you were a big kid growing up, hey, you're going to play football.
Were you a big kid?
When I got to be a freshman and sophomore in high school, I became a good-sized kid. I was almost 6 foot,
right,
180 pounds.
What age are we now at this stage?
15, 16.
Right. Okay. So when you were in school, they had an eye on you as a offensive lineman or a...
Sean, I'm going to be 75. Football back in the 50s, there was no free substitution. So
it was 11 guys against 11 guys with a few subs.
That's right. Yeah. And you took your best 11.
I think it'd be better like that now, no?
Well, that's those rules have changed. But back then, what you did was you learned the sport, And in football, you went both ways. Both ways meaning you played offense and defense.
Yeah.
All right.
You wrecked.
Pardon?
You'd be so tired after the end of a game.
Well, you're young. You got a lot of energy. You kept yourself in shape.
So we're talking about leather helmets now at this stage, and just
I missed
or
the
no
leather
helmets.
No. I missed the leather helmet by about a year or two.
Okay.
All right. I got the first suspension helmets, which were a little bit better than leather, but.
Sticking to the helmet thing while we're on it, where is your head at, excuse the pun, on the whole, what's going on with American football here now? Because it is getting to a point where it's, the number of people who are very anti-American football, from a teenage young kid point of view when it gets contact all the way through to the NFL, where concussions and stuff are being let right. Where do you fit with that? Because you're a lover of the sport.
Well, first of all, if you're going to play the sport, there is a risk. I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, it's a man's game and that's the way it is. There's a risk. There's a risk for injury. Even when I played back in the 60s, a lot of guys had knee problems, ankle problems, some head problems, some concussions, etc. But the game has gotten faster. The players are in some cases massive, and the hitting is harder, only because they're bigger and they're faster. A lot of the rules that have come out weren't in effect 30, 40 years ago. The helmet-to-helmet hit, you could do that then. Oh yeah. Today, ruled against, which is good.
Yeah.
They're trying to bring the safety into the game, but you're still going to have problems with it. You've got to realize that, A, as a player, B, as a family who has a son who wants to play the game, they're going to have to sit there and say, hey, you want to play it, understand the risk, protect yourself as best as you can. Which means stay physically fit and avoid the big hits.
Do you believe that it's a fair trade-off? Because if you become a superstar in motor racing, you might die. In rugby, in any of these contact sports, they get paid a lot of money now.
They do get paid a lot of money. That's why I say you've got to weigh the risk for the reward. I mean, you see a lot of older players today approaching the 70s. So they started their football career back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Some are crippled.
Banjacks, yeah.
So.
And your football career, what was that like? What was it like when you were like?
I played in high school and I played in college. So I like the sport. I like the contact sport. I like the fundamentals of the game: tackling, blocking, catching a ball, running with it, whatever it might be. But it wasn't going to be a profession for me. It was a sport, and that was it.
And parallel to that, you were also, because of what you talked about earlier with the caddying, you were also a golfer at this stage, yeah?
Well, the caddying career was interesting. I started caddying when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
There's a little bit of a funny story there. If you don't mind, I'll share it with you.
Of course.
I was playing in what they call a biddy basketball team as a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
It was out of a Catholic Youth Association program. And one of my coaches liked me. I showed a lot of desire on the floor, and I was that kid that was, I want to play. Let me play.
Yeah.
Get me in there. Let me in there.
Yeah.
So anyways, one day he said to me, he said, would you like to learn the game of golf? We just finished the season. Basketball was over. Spring was coming. I says, well, that's another sport. So he says, come, I'm going to take you out to a golf course with me. And, I'll show you the game. So he takes me out there, and we get to the golf course, and he says, Anthony, see this? Here's the bag. You carry the bag.
He was cheating.
And I'll show you how the game works. I'll show you how the game is played. Oh, and I said, okay, I'll carry the bag.
He just needed it.
So I carried the bag, and he went out and he played a round of golf. And I followed him around with the bag on my shoulder. And we finished the round. He said, Downey, you understand the game? I said, well, yeah, I kind of do. Is it me carrying a bag? Is that what golf is all about? So, well, he says, no, I was showing you how I play. You're someday going to play like that. Oh. He said, well, by the way, here's $2 for carrying the bag. I said, hey, I like this.
Yeah.
It was the first time anybody had ever handed me $2 in money.
Yeah.
I went home, and my father said, you played basketball today? And I said, no, Dad. I went out with my coach. He showed me how to play golf. He says, really? Yeah, and guess what? I took $2 out of my pocket and said, look what he gave me. My father looked at me and said, you made $2 for carrying a bag? Mm-hmm. You're going to do more of that, son. That's how I became a caddy.
And when did you move from caddy to actual golf? And how did that happen?
I started caddying. I eventually ended up at a private course. There's a lot of humor in this because you're a young kid.
Yeah.
My father recognized, hey, there's money in this sport.
Yeah. Put him to work.
Put him to work. And by the way, my father made the effort to drive me to the course in the morning, to be the first caddy on site. The course wouldn't even open until 8 o'clock, but my father had to get to work at 7:30, so he would take me up there at 7:15.
Interesting that we're having this discussion on the day that we lost somebody great who was, you told me today.
He was my second idol.
Yeah.
Arnold Palmer.
Arnold Palmer passed away yesterday, and it seemed to be a little bit unexpected. Tell me why he was your second idol.
Well,
he was your first.
My first one was Ben Hogan. I know I'm old enough to remember Ben Hogan.
Right.
You know, I was a 13-year-old kid and watched him play professional golf up in Rochester at the U.S. Open, which he lost on the 72nd hole.
To who?
Actually, he lost it to a dentist.
Oh, I've heard about this story.
Dr. Kerry Middlecoff. Total shock.
Yeah.
It's part of growing up, you know, you have models in your life, and you say, "Oh, all right," you know, and.
But just to fill a little gap, so you're caddy at 9. I just want to get clear on how you picked up the clubs then, because you started playing.
Well, you know, every week at the private course, they would say, "We're going to give you a caddies day." And no one played golf on Monday except we'll let the caddies go out and play. The sun was
and it's
breaking.
important as a caddy to know how to play.
Absolutely.
Right.
The sun was coming up, and there you are on the first tee.
Brilliant.
And you go out and you play 63 holes.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Minimum.
No, as much as you can. Oh, God.
So did you become a good golfer quickly?
Not right away. Caddying was a heavy influence for me because I spent a lot of time at the course. During the 50s, the local pros would play in a local pro-am tournaments. They could pick up some pocket change, make some money. The local pro at the course that I was at played on a tour back in the 40s. But he got married, had a child, and he said, you can't make the money on the tour. But he got a very good job as the head professional at this private country club, and they took care of him. I started going there in the early 50s. Believe it or not, I went through high school and college, and I could always get a summer job there whenever I wanted to, working in the pro shop or caddy master, etc. So I hung around the club for quite a few years.
Right.
He made me his personal caddy. He'd take me to little tournaments around the Rochester area. I started looking at him and how he played. And literally tried to copy him. Yeah. Go home, stand in front of a full-length mirror, and try to duplicate the swing.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Are you saying that you have seen people you think could have become really great but decided to have a family and settle down?
They ended up with a family. And by the way, they looked for stability. You weren't going to make money on the golf tour.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the history of golf in America, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the pros in many cases were getting beaten by the amateurs. Bobby Jones was an amateur. All right?
Yeah.
He was, quite frankly, in a way, more popular than the pros. Because the U.S.
everyone loves an underdog. What was, segueing away from golf and sport for a second, what was America like in the 50s when you can remember it versus today?
Well, pace was slower. You had time to look at life and kind of educate yourself on the decision-making process that might help you. Today it's rapid, It's fast moving. You got to be quicker. I think you have to be sharper. You better be sharper. Back then, you could take a guy like myself. I could play 3 sports, but I had no intention, or I never thought of, well, I'm going to be a professional football player. Golf, I probably had a better shot at it at the time. That would have been the one sport that I might have been able to make it. But
You never thought about it?
Not really. It was presented to me at one point by some of the members of the course. They said, we could sponsor you. They had PGA schools and things of that nature. And I said, gentlemen, I've already got a career going on. No, it wasn't a career. It was my next move.
Yeah.
Let's put
Tell
it that
me your
way.
next move.
Well, I was after college.
What did you do in college?
I majored in history and poli-sci. Qualification of that job is either I was going to become a teacher or I would have had to go on to law school. I had no desire for either. I knew I did not want to become a teacher, and I knew I did not want to become a lawyer, which meant, hey, you either go in the business world, work at something, and I wasn't even keen on that.
Right.
So I took some physicals and exams, and I went to apply to the OCS program in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
I held off from signing on because I wanted to spend my summer after graduating making sure I was making the right move.
What was the appeal to be a Marine in the Marine Corps?
Oh, I had a lot of older cousins who had served in the military, not in the Marine Corps necessarily, but in the military. They fought in World War II. These were older cousins of mine, guys who were about maybe 15 years older than me.
So we're slap bang in the middle of the Cold War right now.
It was early. It was 1964.
Well, okay, so after Kennedy was...
Oh yeah, it was after the assassination. It was, in fact, it was right after the assassination because he got assassinated in December,
63,
November '63
in Dallas.
There had always been that thing about, well, you know, I could always serve my country. I could always, because I would find it to be an honor to serve my country. The Marines were on campus recruiting, and I had some friends that had already made the decision to move into the Marine Corps. So I decided to go for an interview. Went through the interview, did the tests, passed them all. They said, we want to swear you in. I said, you're going to have to wait until I graduate. And that was a requirement.
Yeah.
You know, they knew that. So I held off. Got into the summer of '64. I was having a good time. College was over. I had my degree. I was working at the course, playing golf an awful lot. I was 22 years old. I was in good shape. Marines thought I was, anyways. So I got towards the end of the summer, and my family had gone on a trip. So I was all home alone. The Gulf of Tonkin, and remember I was a history major, so the Gulf of Tonkin happened in that August of '64. But it was, you know, today it'd be all over the place.
Yeah.
But, you know, I said to you that the times were different. You caught an article in the newspaper, and people said, Gulf of Tonkin, where's that? And we had something happen there? Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to the golf course tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, and time went on. I had made a decision because I said, my mother and father were coming home shortly. I want to put this behind me. I don't want them to be involved in the decision. Because I knew they would be pulling at me not to do it. I knew that. So I made the decision in late August, and I went down to Syracuse, New York, because I had to be sworn in down there. They ran 2 classes a year for the OCS program back then. The requirements for Marine officers.
Explain to people who don't know what OCS means.
Officer Candidate School.
Right.
It's a training program at Quantico, Virginia. Family came home, not too happy about the decision I
Why?
made. Well, it's a thing about they feel if you're in the military, you're going to possibly die. Well, yeah. You can drive in a car nowadays, you could possibly die.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But you're more likely to die if you're in the Marines.
Well, you know, you'd be surprised.
Maybe.
Well,
tell me what happened, though. You joined the Marines.
I joined the Marines. I had to wait till...
Where was your head at? Was there any fear?
Fear? No. The only thing that I would fear is failing to fulfill my mission,
Yeah.
which was to become a Marine officer. I saw a lot of guys not make it. I mean, we started with 400 candidates in my class. 198 graduated.
1 and 2 leave.
Yeah. Well, some don't leave immediately because you made a commitment. So they end up becoming enlisted men for 2 years minimum. So there's an impetus to accomplish it. You want to get it done.
What was it like the day you got it?
The first day?
Yeah. Was it one of the
March 22nd, 1965.
best? There you go. You
Burned
said
in it, just like
You-
my
you
wedding
said
date.
enough. There you go.
All right. It was 10 weeks of physical exertion. That 10 weeks was as tough a camp that I've ever been in. And I've been in some good football camps. Plus, a high mixture of military skill sets. Firing weapons, learning how to use weapons.
Strategy?
Stroll definitely say what we call platoon leader corps type strategies, from learning how to become a lieutenant, running a squad, to a platoon, to a company. And you had squad tactics, platoon tactics, company tactics, all based on some form of combat situations.
Was this amazing at the time for you?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Did you feel like you found something you really loved?
well, I didn't mind the physicality of it all. In fact, it was after I got into it, and it took me a while to get into the physicality because it was a different physicality versus playing football.
Mm-hmm.
Your body had to be in fine-tuned condition. You had to be sharp with your body.
Would they have taught you how to survive torture and stuff like that? And
Well, as time went on, during my tours of duty, you had a class in Vietnamization, and also part of that class was what would happen if you were captured, how to handle yourself,
yeah.
and things of that nature. But that was further down the line, preparing yourself for any eventuality that might come along.
And then an eventuality came along.
Well, yeah, I did a tour in Vietnam.
How much do you want to talk about that? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Well, you
There's people who listen to this podcast who don't even know what Vietnam was.
well, I don't know if you want me to give them a history lesson.
Yeah, well,
but
I wouldn't mind a quick.
Vietnam was the first one of the questions is a political question,
Yeah.
which is okay because it's now 45, 50 years later. And the second aspect of it then turned into a military issue. The political question centers around America's fighting communism.
Correct.
Communism is evil. Communism is creeping into other countries. Vietnam was one of those issues.
Robert McNamara, who
Yes.
would have been one of your.
He was the director.
Your boss.
He was the defense secretary for the United States
At the time.
at the time.
And he has this movie we called The Fog of War where he kind of almost apologizes on in a weird way. But McNamara said you're exactly right, that America was worried that Vietnamese was going to turn communist through China. And he met his counterpart many years later who said at a dinner, what were you guys thinking? We've been fighting the Chinese all our lives, and we were never going to let them in.
Which is very true. Vietnam at one time was what they called French Indochina.
Mm-hmm.
After World War II, a group of communists began a fight against the French, who still controlled
Correct.
Indochina. And their fight was for independence,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the primary role of becoming communistic.
Mm-hmm.
It was for independence. America,
Nothing to do with that.
well, we did because we were supplying the French.
Right, okay.
All right, we were.
Yeah.
We were supplying the French. We were helping them to go back to becoming French Indochina. The Vietnamese were saying, hey, or a group of Vietnamese were saying, look, we want our independence.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happened they were communists. But there was another group there that wanted independence too, but they weren't communists. They were the, quote, people that said, well, we want a democracy in their
Yeah.
minds. They wanted a democracy. That's a long story.
let's go back to the personal thing. You said two things happened, so let's forget the political thing because you're right. We're not going to fix that. What was it like for you? The second point I asked was, what was it like for you when suddenly, okay, now action is about to happen, and you're on a plane over to Vietnam?
Well, yeah. A lot of unknowns, uncertainties. And I had not an inkling, I had a pretty good idea of what we were dealing with. I was going in with my own unit, too, by the way.
So you were in control of the unit at this stage?
That was going in.
Yeah.
Right.
How many people in the unit?
It was part of the 9th Marine Amphibious Brigade. It was a whole brigade going in. You had air support, you had both fixed wing, rotary support, motor transport, you had supply, you had infantry. It was.
Are we talking like a couple of thousand people?
Oh, easily.
Right.
In fact, we took over a base,
right.
A portion of a base when we went in.
What was your head and heart saying when you landed first in Vietnam to yourself?
Stay alive.
Really? That's simple?
Well, everyone's going to. You have to have that emotion inside of you. I was at a base in what they call I Corps. It's the northernmost province of Vietnam. I was at a base called Chu Lai. It's on the China Sea.
China Beach, around there.
China Beach runs all the way from Chu Lai up to Da Nang. A big base. Mm-hmm. The Americans had come in there in 66, I believe it was. The 1st Marines. Mm. They came into Da Nang. They came into Chu Lai. And they had other bases around the north, I Corps, as we called it. By the time I got there, it was 67. The base was even larger than it was when they first went in. We had a 10,000-foot airstrip built. Massive troop deployments coming in through Chu Lai. Squadrons of Marines, fighter units, helicopter, you name it. Part of my responsibility was defense protection. It settled into a day of, the day and night, rocket attacks, mortars, etc. A lot of probing by the enemy. To a certain degree, it was everyday living. You had some issues, meaning some guys were getting killed on the line. But it also was a day-to-day boredom.
Yeah.
Waiting. Towards the end of my tour, almost, not quite the end of my tour, but 1968, the Tet Offensive hit, and the North Vietnamese felt this was going to topple the whole government, and it was a little hot. Mm. But I'll say it to you in a nice way, we kicked the living daylights out of them. That was a turning point politically in America. What came back was, oh my God, we were supposed to be safe and the thing was being stabilized.
Yep.
But that's not the way it was presented when it came back to the United States. That's where the politics and the military didn't mesh. One thing I'll say to you, Sean, I've put that behind me, even though I had some friends, good friends, I think I want to call them, who didn't make it home. Mm-hmm. It took me a while to adjust to that process of why, what happened, why did it happen. But it's past me now.
Let's just move on because we're not gonna. We don't need to go into it in huge detail. But you come home. Tell me, what was like coming home?
Well, first of all, it was a nice experience to leave.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I came back in April of 1968. I remember coming into LAX. It was 4 a.m. I think it was April 1. Yeah. What stuck in my head was, Jesus, we're coming into LAX, but the plane is way, way out on the tarmac, not the main terminal. And buses were coming out to load the troops into the buses and take them out the back door.
Because there was protesters.
Well, by the way, I'd been overseas for over a year, So the only thing I saw were the Stars and Stripes newspaper. You know,
Which would be a bit one-sided.
well, you get
Given its
the
name.
only good thing about it is I get the baseball scores in there.
Well, indeed.
But they were 2 days old.
Yeah. No internet, no mobile
No,
phones.
no. It was a different world. But
Do you think technology would have helped you?
in the
Like
war,
the technology we have today where everything's... Yeah, in that war. People knowing what's going on, people being able to video what's going on.
you have to deal with it now and then. And then the issue, Vietnam was, well, I'm not speechless on the subject, trust me. It's
You're
just
being
that,
careful.
well, it's not even a question of careful. It was something that maybe shouldn't have happened. It did happen.
Yeah.
If it was going to happen, which it did do, we should have either stayed with the commitment. If you really follow it carefully, it was the Congress that pulled the plug out on the South Vietnamese. One thing I should add to that, I trained with the South Vietnamese in my OCS program. They were sending their officers, South Vietnamese Marine officers, to Quantico for training. Some of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life. South Vietnamese Marines. I don't even want to think what took place and what happened to those individuals. But it's many years past.
So you're home.
I'm home.
You then set up. You then decide to go into business.
Well, no.
No, you don't. Sorry.
I come back and I said, well, where am I going to live? Where am I going to live? Obviously, I got to go back to Rochester to say hello to my family.
Of course.
But I mustered out of the Marines. I said they wanted me to stay in. I said no, and my commitment is fulfilled. I said that's not for me.
Right.
I want to see what the rest of the world looks like. I know what I'm leaving,
Yeah.
and I'm not quite sure where I'm going, but I know the direction I'm going.
Right.
And I came home. My family wanted me to move back to Rochester. I said, nah, I need some lights.
Meaning what?
Well, I just spent a year overseas. It was
Oh, it's dark. Yeah.
oh, it was dark at night, man.
Yeah. Brilliant.
I need some lights. I want to see lights 24 hours a day.
Was this Manhattan?
That's Manhattan.
Brilliant.
And I did. I moved into the West Village. There I was, probably the only Marine in the West Village at the time. I had a railroad flat on Spring and Thompson. $175 a month rent.
Wow.
Right? Whew. You couldn't touch that with four figures right now, probably.
Absolutely right. It's probably the
It
same.
was,
nick
by
that
the
you
way,
left
it's
it.
now called Soho, right? Back then it was, it's the West Village. There was nothing down there.
Yeah.
I mean, there was,
Were you starting from scratch?
well, I had some, I had
You
some
had
good-
money from
Well, yeah, I did. I had a nice, remember I was in Vietnam for, 12 months, whatever it was, and all my pay was just being banked. Combat pay, which was $75 a month.
Nah, that's putting the 175 a month in perspective, isn't it? So what did you decide to do then? What was your head? Where was your
Well,
head at?
for the first couple of months, I said, I'm on R&R. I was just going to
Have
enjoy
fun.
New York.
Yeah, but a lot of people came back, we know, which wasn't even a thing then, but with post-traumatic stress. And did you have any of those things happen to you?
My sleeping wasn't so hot. I remember visiting my mother's sister, who was living on Long Island at the time. She says, about 3 or 4 days after I'd been there, I was sleeping on a couch. She says, Anthony, you're a wreck. I says, what do you mean? She says, you jump almost every minute. I says, Barb, and her name is Barbara. I says, Barbara, you know what? I probably am a wreck. If you'd been to Vietnam and you keep one eye open almost all the time, and you worry about the troops, you see things that you just kind of push out of your mind and move into the next minute, let that last minute go away. Yes, I am a wreck.
How did you put your life back on a keel then?
Well, like I said, I threw myself, came into New York, got myself an apartment, 2 or 3 weeks later, I said, well, let me go test the market for jobs, see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I found an organization called Lenman Associates. I even remember the name. It was on 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. It's early June 1968. Yeah, the news is blaring out. Vietnam is still hot. Martin Luther King was killed in April. Bobby Kennedy was killed in June. Politics was crazy. Seems like we're reliving that.
We are a bit.
I went up to Lenman Associates. I had a 10 a.m. appointment in the lobby of the building. Someone taps me on my shoulder. Turn around, it was an old fraternity brother of mine that I hadn't seen in 4 years. And he had a nickname, Feathers. And I said, Feathers, what are you doing here? So I got an appointment upstairs. I said, who do you want to see? Lenman Associates. I says, for what? He says, I need a job. Where have you been? I said, I was in the Navy.
Oh my God.
He was a SEAL. Vietnam. No matter what, there's saloons alive at 10 o'clock in the morning. Mostly Irish saloons.
Of course, thank
So
you.
guess
At least
what
we
we
did
did?
something for society.
So we didn't make that appointment that morning. We headed out, caught up. Well, the next couple of weeks, that's all we did was head out.
You became a businessman, though. Tell
Well,
me
I got a
how
job.
quickly you became a businessman.
Well, I got a job through Lenman Associates. I went to work for American Express. But it was my first job in the business world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we were the first class in the credit card division management program.
Reason being probably because credit cards were just being invented.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're right. The good thing about that job is I ended up working in the sales group. I handled all of Long Island. Restaurants, airlines, shops, etc. I had to sign them up.
How many years did you spend with American Express?
2 years.
So Tony moved then to Xerox and then became a...
I spent 7 years at Xerox. I worked up through both the sales division group into management, and eventually became a trainer also. And from that point on, I made a decision that there are maybe greener pastures on the other side of the fence. I went to a competitor, worked 3 years as a national manager at this competitor, grew their business from 0 to 50 million. Decided, hey, if I can do that, I can run my own business. And eventually I hooked up with two other gentlemen, and we went into business in the early 80s in the New York market, selling office products.
And that business lasted for...
Well, I sold it actually in the late 80s, late 80s. I bought out my partners and made a couple of acquisitions in the 90s. Well, it was good. It was good. We got our sales up to 35 million, but 1996 I had a heart attack at the age of 54.
Why?
Why? Shawnee, that's a great question. You know what I did though? That night of my heart attack, as I was laying in that hospital, and it was dark in the hospital because it was January, when those lights are flashing all over the place because I'm wired up, I said the same thing. How did I get here? How did I get here? And I said to myself, guess what? It's time to move on to something else in life, because life is too precious to waste my time selling copiers. And I made a decision. At that point, I will sell the company as quick or as possible, as fast as I could.
You were married at this stage with
I
two
was
children?
married. I had 2 children. Both of them were in college at the time.
Yeah. How quickly did you sell the company then?
I had a young executive in the company who worked with me. He was also a neighbor of mine. He was a great guy. And he pulled together some investors over time and was able to pull off the purchase. He bought it in 2001. I kept a piece of the company, which was down here in Charleston. But then again, I sold that by 2003 when I finally got down here.
What do you say to the young Tony Pavoni, and B, anyone who might be a young Tony Pavoni out there today? Are you proud of what you did?
I'm very proud. You know, Sean, I'm looking at a photo. It's a photograph of my father's picture on the wall over here. He was probably around 19 or 20 at the time. And when I was growing up, you know, that small town, I remember he was a road worker, but he always had a focus on doing something more than just being a road worker. He became a manager when I say a manager, he was actually called the boss of a shipping gang in a panel factory, which was one of the largest panel factories in the country back in the 50s. His people and him were responsible for packing those pianos and putting them on trucks, trains, etc., and shipping them throughout the United States. He didn't have a computer then, but he had a big log book. He'd bring it home with him. And in his handwriting, you could see what he was shipping and where he was shipping it. Remember, this is a guy that only got through 4th grade. If I could say anything to the young kids today, you probably can get a lesson from a person like him who said, look, I'm going to have a focus, but it's going to be in front of me, and I'm going to drive to it. That focus has always been there for that man. And quite honestly, the focus has always been there for me. Drive towards it. Have I made mistakes? Heck yeah. I've learned from them. And I try not to make them again, or the same ones again. Drive towards your focus, or better than that is don't run away from something, run towards something.
That's a great way to end the podcast. That was a great journey you brought me on. Anthony Pavoni, thank you very much for,
You're welcome, sure.
for allowing me into your house. Tony is one of the greatest, not only raconteurs as you heard, but he's a very generous guy, and he's a guy who he's one of the greatest guys to go on a pint with. So if you're ever in Charleston, you know who to look at. Tony, look after yourself, and thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Sean.